Today we are going to explore equivalent forms of rational numbers. If you remember, a rational number is a positive number, a negative integer, zero. It can include decimals, percents, fractions, as well as mixed numbers. As you can see on this slide, this is something we went over at the very beginning of school, but we wanted to review to make sure you have a good understanding of what rational numbers do include. If you recall, whole numbers are integers. Integers are rational numbers, as you see here, and I'm sure you'll remember this diagram from the very beginning of school and from our blitz as well. So if you look at this very first problem, we're going to convert a fraction to a percent and a fraction to a decimal. We're going to be looking at 1/4. If a recipe called for 1/4 of a cup and I needed to make that a percent or I needed to make that a decimal, we're going to explore how to do that today. In order to turn this fraction 1/4 into a decimal, we must take n over d, the numerator divided by the denominator, which is what you see here in purple. 1 divided by 4. Well, 4 can't go into 1, so I do have to add my decimal and zeros, which does not change the value of the 1, in order for us to divide properly. When you divide, multiply, subtract, and bring down, this decimal turns into, or this fraction, turns into 0.25 or 25 hundredths. To turn a decimal to a percent, simply look at your decimal, move it 2 places to the right, and add a percent sign. So in this case, 1/4 would turn into 25%. Looking at the next one, 75%, who knows how to change that percent into a fraction and into a decimal equivalent? In order to change a percent into a fraction, percent means per 100. Simply write it over 100 and reduce it to simplest form. In this case, if I take 25 out of the numerator and 25 out of the denominator, 75 divided by 25 gives me a numerator of 3. 100 divided by 25 gives me a numerator of 4. Now my fraction is in simplest form, and I know that 75% of a dollar is also 3/4 of a dollar. To turn the fraction 3/4 into a decimal, we could use the same formula we did above, n over d, or we could simply work backwards from what we did here and know that if I move my decimal 2 places to the left, I now have a decimal equivalent to that percent. 75% is the same thing as 75 hundredths, which is also the same thing as 3/4. In our last example, we are turning a decimal into a percent and into a fraction. To turn the decimal 65 hundredths into a percent, simply move the decimal 2 places to the right, adding your percent sign. And 65 hundredths becomes 65%. Because we know 65%, we know that percent means per 100, we know that we can write 65 over 100. We also know that because knowing place value, the 6 is in the tenths place and the 5 is in the hundredths place. So in this case, our fraction would be 65 hundredths. But as we always do, we want to make sure we write our fraction in simplest form. So if I take the factor 5 out of 65, 65 divided by 5, and I also take it out of my denominator, 100 divided by 5, I have my fraction in simplest form now, which would be 13/20. So now that you know, it's your turn. Let's take 3/4 of a cup, turn it into an equivalent percent, and turn it into an equivalent decimal. Then let's take 36%, turn it into an equivalent fraction and into an equivalent decimal. Please pause the video now, and then I will come back and show you just how to do it and how well you did. So how did you do? To turn a fraction to a percent and to a decimal, I'm first going to take the numerator and divide it by the denominator, adding my decimal and zeros. Divide, multiply, subtract, and bring down. My final decimal is 75 hundredths, and I know to change a decimal into a percent, I simply move the decimal 2 places to the right, add a percent sign, and I am good to go. Looking at your last example, to turn 36% into a fraction and a decimal, looking at a percent, I know that that's a whole number, so the decimal sits to the right of the 6. If I move it back 2 places, I know that I now have 36 hundredths, which is my decimal. If I take 36 hundredths and I use a common factor to simplify that, I divide by 4 on the top, I divide by 4 on the bottom, it turns into 9 over 25. A fraction can be written this way, it means 36 hundredths, but remember with place value, this is also 36 hundredths. The tenths place, and then this one is the hundredths place. So I hope this was a good review for you guys, and let's get working.